Shalom. First and foremost, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham Yahushai, Bahasham, Rachak Kodash. Double honors to the elders and the apostles of Great Millstone, and peace and blessings to the elect. And today we're going to go into the book of Isaiah, the 15th chapter. And pretty much as we go through this chapter, it's as the subheading shows, right, a pronouncing of judgment on or against Moab. Okay, and which Isaiah describes with vivid imagery the state of, chaos and mourning that the Moabites are going to be in with this judgment the Lord will bring upon them. Now, it's mainly spoken of as like, a general kind of punishment the Lord would bring, right? It doesn't really specify when the Lord would do this. Though, when you read or when you go throughout secular history, you see that there were certain points in time where the Lord brought, for example, the Babylonians when they took over the region, right? The Moabites didn't escape them as well. And I believe Ezekiel also mentions that when he prophesied against the land. Now, there are a couple of verses in here that are parallel with what's written in the book of Jeremiah, I believe around the 48th chapter. So Jeremiah also prophesies of this judgment that comes against Moab. All right, which lets us know that it's very likely or probable that this major judgment wasn't really carried out by the Assyrians, because around the time of Jeremiah coming on the scene, what the Assyrians had done, right, would have pretty much sort of preceded that, right, when they came into the land and they besieged Samaria and so on and so forth. So this is Isaiah chapter 15, verse 1. The burden of Moab. Now, when you go to Isaiah 13, right, we went into the burden of Babylon, which we understood this to be a future prophecy. Okay, so now the Lord has a message concerning Moab. So it says here, the burden of Moab, because in the night Ar of Moab is laid waste and brought to silence, because in the night Kir of Moab is laid waste and brought to silence, right? Which is to signify, typically if you think of like in the night, it's sort of like an unexpected point, right, in time where suddenly, this destruction comes by whatever means the Lord brings it, right? Probably by an invasion, right? Or a takeover from a foreign power, or who knows, right? Well, the point here is that basically coming upon them unawares, destruction comes upon their cities, right? Ar and Kir being two of them. He is gone up to Bajith and to Dibon, the high places, to weep, right? Which is the Moabites. Basically, when this destruction comes upon them, right, they're going to start mourning. They're going to go up to their high places, which are places where they worship and sacrifice unto their idols, and weep and mourn. It says here, Moab shall howl over Nebo and over Medeba. All on all their heads shall be baldness, and every beard cut off. And right, the baldness of the head, the beard, those were signs of mourning. Now, these regions here, right, Nebo and Medeba and so on, when you look here at Nebo, you see here it is located in the region of Reuben, right? So if we were to look up here, Mount Nebo or Nebo, right, it says here, oh, not that. Let's look at this one historically. Here we go. So Mount Nebo is an elevated ridge located in Jordan, approximately 700 meters above sea level. Part of the Abarim mountain range. Mount Nebo is mentioned in the Bible as the place where Moses was granted a view of the promised land before his death. Now, what's interesting about this is, like I showed on here, this was within the region of Reuben. However, at this point in time, when this prophecy was being given, the Moabites had regained some of these territories back. And when you go back during the time of, because we had pretty much all these nations, these neighboring nations in subjection under us, right? Going back to the time of King David and then the kings following him. But I believe around the time of Ahab is where you had the revolt, or at least when you look into the Mesha Stele, right, that Moabite king Mesha goes into that, how they ended up basically revolting and gaining some of those cities back. So I looked it up here, right? Which cities did Mesha get back from Ahab? It says here, King Mesha of Moab regained control of the cities of Nebo and Horonaim, which had previously been under the control of Ahab of Israel. The Mesha Stele, also known as the Moabite Stone, records this event, detailing Mesha's successful rebellion against Israel and his liberation of Moab from the suzerainty, from their suzerainty. So, in other words, their lordship or their control over them. The Stele further mentions that Mesha's actions were directed by his deity Chemosh, the primary Moabite god. And I believe on this stone it talks about the house of David, and it also has the name of the Lord, right, the God of Israel on there, right, as Yahweh. So going back here, even though this Mount Nebo and so on is in the at least region where Reuben was, right, we know now that after that rebellion from Mesha, right, it makes sense that the Moabites had regained control of certain parts in here, going now towards the time of Isaiah, right? Because we know Ahab preceded Isaiah. So going back to Isaiah 15, that's why it's mentioning these, like Nebo, as one of these areas where the Moabites would like go and cry upon and mourn as their high places. Verse 3, in their streets shall they gird themselves with sackcloth, on the tops of their houses and in their streets everyone shall howl, weeping abundantly. Okay, once again, that image of mourning, right? That image of being, destitute in suffering. Now, the tops of their houses, right? You have to keep in mind that in the ancient world, the let's see, rooftop in Bible times. Yeah, so it's, let's see, I think they have it here, right? In Bible times, the rooftop is also a very different cultural space than roofs today in our American context, and that's important to keep in mind. The ancient roof was used as a bedroom, a dining room, a closet, a chapel, and a stage. As we get to Yahushua, a roof is transformed into a door. So, yeah, here we go. This is one of them, right? It says here, in Bible times, flat rooftops were commonly used for various purposes, including drying produce, socializing, and even sleeping during warmer months. I believe when we read in the book of Acts, the 10th chapter, it talks about how Peter, I think he was on a rooftop when he fell asleep and received that vision, if I remember correctly. Um, they also served as a place for prayer and religious ceremonies, both for the true God and sometimes for idols, right? So when you think of rooftop, you know, we are so used to imagining, see if I can get the image of it. Okay, here's one of them. We're so used to imagining like a modern day rooftop, but in the ancient world it was used differently. So here's like a stairs leading up to the actual rooftop area of a house where you could, do the various things we read about there. Okay. So when it goes back in, it mentions their where is it at? On the tops of their houses, right, wearing sackcloth and mourning and weeping. It's not like somebody's hanging on a triangular shaped rooftop about to slip off and fall, but it would make sense that they would be on, yeah, in these regions also, or these locations also mourning. So it says here, in their streets everyone shall howl, weeping abundantly, and Heshbon shall cry, and Eliela, their voice shall be heard even unto Jahaz, right? Once again, cities and regions that Moab had gained control of. Therefore the armed soldiers of Moab shall cry out, his life shall be grievous unto him, right? So even the soldiers who are supposed to be poised to defend the city are going to be, joining in this mourning because of this desolation or this destruction that will come upon them by whatever means the Lord had it manifest by. Verse 5, my heart shall cry out for Moab, his fugitives shall flee unto Zoar. Now, this is like, you know, imagine when you're speaking, right, and you're mentioning like the judgments that are going to come upon the place, and the Lord is going to do this, that, and the third, and you were to say something like it'll be so crazy, like you might even feel bad for them, because of how bad this destruction is going to be. And that's like similar to what Isaiah is saying here. He's not saying, that this basically doesn't mean anything more than the example I just gave here, right? Because sometimes you have to keep in mind, right, when you think of heathens, it's almost like an always hate, like there ain't nothing, shit, whatever kind of thing. So, if anybody says anything remotely kind, right, in the scriptures about the heathens, well, what does that mean, or why are they saying that? But it's just, general speak, right? So it says here, my heart shall cry out for Moab. And this is really more so another point of emphasis to show like this is how bad this destruction is going to be. That even though the Moabites weren't best friends with Israel, right, at all times, um, even still, right, like this is how bad it's going to be. His fugitives shall flee unto Zoar, right, and we know Zoar located here, right, south of the Dead Sea, and you got Moab over here, right, having gained some regions and territory over here. Basically, it's going to get so bad that they're going to flee down to Zoar, right, going more towards, now you're headed towards Edom territory. And as it says here, onto Zoar and heifer of 3 years old. And really, it should say like as an heifer of 3 years old. For by the mounting up of Luhith, and which is another region in Moab, mounting up meaning going up that region, with weeping shall they go it up, or shall they go up it. And the reason it mentions here a 3-year-old, an heifer of 3 years old, an heifer is like a female cow, right? And 3 years old is just to signify it would be like a grown cow, right? And I believe typically like the female cows around, like the grown stage when they what's the word that the cows do? Is it low, right? Lowing, right? Lowing cow. Yeah, it says lowing refers to the vocal sound made by cattle, often described as a deep, long moo or bellow, right? And so here it's describing, well, Isaiah is describing like this state of mourning, like similar to like if you were to hear a grown heifer lowing, right, or making that moo sound. Now he's not saying that the Moabites are going to be mooing, but it's just a comparison of like just hearing all those crying sounds and mourning sounds, like as if a heifer was like intensely lowing. That's why it mentions that comparison there, and then mentions right with weeping shall they go up, for in the way of Horonaim they shall raise up a cry of destruction. Right, so this is all. This is why it's mentioned as a burden of Moab, because this would be a destruction the Lord would bring upon the Moabites. For the waters of Nimrim shall be desolate. Right, once again, a location there um, in Moab. For the hay is withered away, the grass faileth, and there is no green thing. Right, so now you're going into like you having destruction. The soldiers are not fighting. The people are mourning in the streets. Now they basically have no water, right? There's no crops, like none of that stuff. Therefore, the abundance they have gotten, and that which they have laid up, shall they carry away to the brook of the willows, right? So the things that they had stored up, whatever surplus they had over the various years, they would take that with them as they basically are fleeing from the land from this destruction. Okay, as it mentions to the brook of the willows. And when you look this up, it's identified with some regions somewhere down here bordering Moab and Edom, right? So now you can picture a visual of them scrambling to now get some refuge, right, and taking uh, um, you know, their supplies or their surplus and all that with them as they try to leave that area. Verse 8, for the cry is gone round about the borders of Moab. So everywhere, right, there's this lamentation. The howling thereof unto Eglaim, and the howling thereof unto Beer-elim. Once again, regions in Moab. For the waters of Dimon shall be full of blood, right? Which that's that same. Well, actually, it's I, some sources try to link that Dimon and Dibon to say the M and the B are just like interchangeable there. But regardless, the point here is that there, there's going to be mourning in the territory of Moab. And this region here, right, the waters of Dimon, probably being some river or some body of water over there, as it says, shall be full of blood. For I will bring more upon Dimon, lions upon him that escapeth of Moab, and upon the remnant of the land. Right. So those that are left that are trying to flee, the Lord is like, I'm not done yet. I'm still, gonna bring some more judgment upon them. And keep in mind that these the judgments the Lord is bringing against these neighboring nations is because of the things that they did against Israel, because it wasn't always immediate that when a nation came against Israel for at whatever point in time and did what they did and were an adversary to us, that the Lord punished them right away. Right. So mainly we read about the judgments the Lord brought or would bring upon Israel, but there are also judgments the Lord pronounces against these other nations here. And when it mentions the waters of Dimon being full of blood, right, signifying this like mass death, right, and destruction or slaughter, right, and this is a common sight when if you deal with like certain like villages or those kinds of regions, right, where you have these streams about. If there was a slaughter in the city, you would have the stream get bloody, right? Because the blood of the slain on the ground would eventually find its way into that body of water, right? And then making the color of it, more red. Okay, but that's like the visual here, once again, um, of this judgment the Lord would bring upon Moab. So that brings us to the end of Isaiah, the 15th chapter. Once again, really just shifting the focus a bit onto pronouncing judgment against one of the neighboring nations of Israel at this time, being Moab. So with that, Lord willing, you were edified. In closing, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, Bahasham, Rechak Wadash. And until next time, Shalom.